Oh, come on. You really expect anyone here to believe you belong in this courtroom? Officer Daniel Hayes didn't lower his voice. Didn't need to. He stepped closer, slow and deliberate, the rubber tip of his taser tapping lightly against his palm, as his eyes dragged from Aaliyah Bennett's shoes, up to her face, lingering just long enough to make the message clear. Federal case, he added with a short, mocking laugh. That's a new one? A few people turned. Someone smirked. Hayes tilted his head, circling her once, like he was inspecting something out of place. You picked the wrong room to pretend in, he said, flicking 2 fingers toward the courtroom doors, as if dismissing her entirely. Aaliyah didn't move, didn't flinch. That only seemed to irritate him more. Let me guess, he continued, voice sharper now. You forgot your credentials too. He didn't wait for an answer. The taser clicked. A sudden crack split the air. Aaliyah's body hit the floor. Gasps erupted. Her briefcase burst open, and something slid across the polished tiles. Dark leather, gold lettering. United States Department of Justice. The room went silent. Hayes didn't smile anymore, because in that moment, he realized he hadn't just humiliated the wrong person. He had just ended his own career. If you think this is where the story ends, it's only just beginning. Stay with me. Drop your city and local time in the comments, and make sure you're subscribed because what happens next will change everything you thought you knew. By 9:40 a.m., the courthouse at 219 South Dearborn Street was already alive with quiet urgency, the kind that didn't need noise to feel heavy. Clerks moved briskly between hallways lined with polished stone. Attorneys stood in small clusters, voices low, words precise. Security officers scanned the steady flow of people entering and exiting courtroom 4B, where a high-profile case involving alleged police misconduct was scheduled to begin in less than 20 minutes. And at the far end of the corridor, walking with measured steps that neither rushed nor hesitated, was Aaliyah Bennett. She didn't draw attention by force, but people noticed her anyway. Early 30s. Composed. Focused. Her posture was upright without stiffness, her expression calm without softness. She wore a tailored charcoal blazer over a crisp ivory blouse, the lines clean, intentional. No unnecessary movement, no wasted energy. In her left hand, a structured leather briefcase. In her right, a slim folder secured with a discreet clasp. Everything about her suggested preparation, precision, control. She paused briefly outside the courtroom doors, glancing once at the schedule posted beside the frame. People versus Holloway. 10 a.m., her case. Or more accurately, the case she had been assigned to oversee. Aaliyah Bennett wasn't just another attorney walking into a hearing. She was federal counsel attached to a Department of Justice review team quietly brought in to monitor and intervene in cases where local handling raised concerns of procedural misconduct. Cases like this one. Her eyes scanned the hallway once more, not nervously, but deliberately. She noted the positioning of officers, the spacing between security stations, the body language of those waiting. Habit, training, awareness. A young clerk standing nearby glanced at her briefly, then again, longer this time. His gaze lingered uncertain, as if trying to place her, or question her. It wasn't hostility, not openly, but it wasn't neutral either. Across the hall, 2 attorneys leaned slightly toward one another. "Who's that?" one murmured. "No idea," the other replied. "Doesn't look like local counsel." Aaliyah didn't react, didn't acknowledge. She adjusted her grip on the briefcase and stepped forward. The double doors to courtroom 4B stood partially open, guarded by a uniformed officer checking credentials as individuals passed through. Officer Daniel Hayes. Mid-40s, broad-shouldered, his uniform pressed sharply badge catching the overhead light with each subtle shift of his posture. He stood with the confidence of someone who believed he understood exactly who belonged and who didn't. His eyes moved quickly, efficiently from face to face. Scan. Assess. Allow. Deny. It was a rhythm he had perfected over years. And then his gaze landed on Aaliyah. It didn't pass over her the way it had others. It stayed. Just a second longer than necessary, long enough to form an impression, a conclusion. His posture shifted almost imperceptibly, not enough for most people to notice, but enough. Aaliyah approached without hesitation. "Good morning," she said evenly, her voice calm, professional. Hayes didn't return the greeting. Instead, his eyes flicked briefly to the briefcase in her hand, then back to her face. "Hold on," he said, lifting one hand slightly, not aggressively, but with clear authority. The line behind her slowed. Aaliyah stopped. "Credentials," Hayes added. The word wasn't unusual. The tone was flat, sharp, more directive than procedural. Aaliyah nodded once, already reaching into her folder. "Of course." She retrieved a slim ID case and opened it smoothly, revealing her identification. Hayes leaned in slightly. Not close enough to be intrusive, but not distant enough to be respectful either. His eyes scanned the card, then moved back to her. Then back to the card again. A pause, just long enough to stretch the moment. "Your counsel?" he asked. The word carried a faint edge, not curiosity, something closer to disbelief. Aaliyah held his gaze. "Yes." Another pause. Behind her, someone shifted impatiently. Hayes didn't move, didn't wave her through. Instead, he straightened slightly, one eyebrow lifting just enough to signal doubt. "Federal," he added. Aaliyah nodded once. "That's correct." Silence lingered between them. Thin. Tense. Hayes handed the ID back, but not immediately. His fingers held it a fraction longer than necessary before releasing it. "All right," he said slowly, but he didn't step aside, didn't open the path. Aaliyah noticed. Of course she did, but her expression didn't change. "Is there an issue, officer?" She asked, her tone still even. Hayes exhaled lightly through his nose. Not quite a laugh. Not quite dismissal. "Just making sure everything checks out," he replied. His eyes flicked once more over her head to toe, quick, practiced. Assessing. Measuring. Judging. And in that moment, something subtle shifted in the air between them. Not loud, not visible, but present. Aaliyah could feel it. The hesitation, the doubt. Not based on anything she had done, but on something else entirely. Something unspoken. Behind Hayes, the courtroom buzzed faintly voices, movement, the quiet build-up before proceedings began. Time was passing. Aaliyah adjusted her folder slightly. "I'd like to take my seat before the hearing begins," she said. Hayes didn't answer immediately. His jaw tightened just slightly, as if something about her composure, her certainty, didn't sit right with him, as if it challenged something he hadn't expected to be challenged. He shifted his weight. Then, finally, he stepped half an inch to the side. Not enough to fully clear the way. Just enough to make the message ambiguous. "You can wait a second," he said. The words were casual. The control behind them wasn't. Aaliyah didn't move, didn't argue. But she didn't step back either. For a brief moment, neither of them spoke. The hallway seemed to narrow around them, and somewhere in the background a phone camera lifted quietly, not yet recording. but ready. Because something about this interaction felt like it wasn't over. Not even close. The moment should have ended the second her credentials were verified. That was how it worked. That was how it was supposed to work. But Officer Daniel Hayes didn't step aside. Not completely. Not in the way he had for everyone else. Instead, he shifted just enough to make it look like he had moved while still blocking the doorway with his shoulder, his arm loosely extended across the entrance as if it belonged there. As if she didn't. "Go ahead," Hayes said casually to the man behind Aaliyah, barely sparing him a glance. The man didn't hesitate. Didn't question. He walked straight past Aaliyah and into the courtroom. Another followed. Then another. Each one waved through with a nod, a flick of the wrist, a brief look at their badge. No pause longer than a second. No scrutiny. No doubt. Aaliyah remained standing in place, still, waiting, watching. The difference wasn't subtle anymore. It was visible, measured, deliberate. She let 2 more people pass before speaking again, her voice calm, but now carrying a sharper edge of clarity. "Officer," she said, "you've already checked my credentials." Hayes didn't respond immediately. He adjusted the strap of his glove, looked past her. Let another man through with a quick nod. Only then did he turn back. "Yeah," he said slowly. "I saw something. Something. Not valid, not confirmed. Something." The word hung in the air, heavy with implication. Aaliyah's expression didn't change, but her gaze sharpened just slightly. "If there's an issue," she replied, "you can state it clearly." A faint smirk formed at the corner of Hayes's mouth. It wasn't open hostility. It was worse. It was quiet certainty. The kind that didn't need to explain itself. "You're telling me," he said, tilting his head, as he looked her up and down, again slower this time, more deliberate. "You're federal counsel on this case?" The question wasn't a question. It was a challenge. Aaliyah met his gaze without hesitation. "Yes." Another pause. Longer now. Behind her, the hallway had begun to shift. Not in movement, in attention. People weren't just passing anymore. They were watching. A clerk slowed near the wall, pretending to check paperwork. A woman seated on a bench lowered her phone, then raised it again, angling it slightly. Recording. Hayes handed the ID back, but he didn't release it immediately. His fingers held onto it just a fraction longer than necessary before letting go. "Federal," he repeated quietly, almost to himself. Then louder. "That's not exactly entry-level work." There it was. Not loud, not explicit, but unmistakable. Aaliyah didn't react outwardly, didn't rise to it. "I'm aware of my role," she said evenly. Hayes let out a short breath through his nose, something close to a laugh, but without humor. "Right," he muttered. "I'm sure you are." Silence stretched between them again, but this time it wasn't neutral. It was loaded. Aaliyah adjusted the folder in her hand, her movements precise, controlled. "I need to enter the courtroom," she said. Simple, professional, final. Hayes didn't move. Instead, his eyes flicked to her briefcase, then back to her face, then down again, as if searching for something that wasn't there, or something he believed should be. "Hold on," he said. The words were soft, but the authority behind them was firm. Aaliyah didn't step back. "On what basis?" she asked. Hayes shifted his stance, planting his feet more firmly in front of the doorway. "You're making this harder than it needs to be," he replied. "No," Aaliyah said calmly. "I'm asking for a reason." That word again. Reason. It seemed to irritate him more than resistance would have. Because resistance he understood. Reason required justification, and he didn't offer one. Instead, he reached forward suddenly without warning toward her folder. Not violently, but without permission. Aaliyah reacted instantly. Her hand tightened, pulling the folder back just enough to break his reach. "Do not touch my documents," she said. Her voice didn't rise, but it carried. Clear, sharp, public. The effect was immediate. The small group of observers shifted closer, not physically, but in attention. This wasn't routine anymore. This wasn't standard. Hayes' expression hardened. "I'm checking what needs to be checked," he said. "You've already done that," Aaliyah replied. His jaw tightened. "You're being difficult." "No," she said. "I'm being precise." That word again. Precise, controlled, unshaken. Behind Hayes, another officer, young, less certain, shifted his weight slightly, glancing between them. He saw it. The imbalance, the escalation. But he didn't step in. Didn't speak. Because stepping in meant choosing a side. And no one wanted to be the first to do that. Hayes exhaled sharply, then nodded once, as if making a decision. "Open the bag," he said, gesturing toward her briefcase. The request wasn't framed as optional. Aaliyah didn't move. "State your grounds," she said. Hayes gave a short, humorless laugh. "You really want to do this right here?" he asked. "We're already doing it," she replied. Another pause. Longer now. Thicker. The hallway felt smaller. Tighter. The sound of distant conversation inside the courtroom faded beneath the tension building just outside its doors. Hayes stepped closer. Close enough now that his presence felt intentional. Assertive. "You're holding up proceedings," he said. Aaliyah glanced past him briefly. Inside, people were still moving freely. No one was waiting on her. She looked back at him, then step aside. The words were quiet, but absolute. For a moment, he didn't respond. Didn't move. Didn't blink. And then his hand drifted lower, closer to his belt. Not gripping anything. Not yet. But close enough. A signal. Subtle, but unmistakable. Aaliyah saw it. So did the people watching. So did the phone recording from across the hall. The line had already been crossed. Everyone could feel it now. They just hadn't said it out loud. Because saying it would make it real. And if it became real, there would be no going back. Hayes tilted his head slightly, studying her one last time, as if waiting. For hesitation. For fear. For something that would justify what he was about to do next. But Aaliyah didn't give him anything. She stood exactly where she was. Calm. Unmoved. Certain. And somehow that made it worse. Because in that moment it was no longer about procedure, or credentials, or even control. It was about being challenged. In front of witnesses. In front of cameras. In front of a room that was beginning to understand exactly what was unfolding. And Hayes wasn't backing down. Not anymore. Not now. Not with all eyes on him. Because the next move he made would change everything. The shift didn't happen all at once. It never did. It crept in quiet, controlled, wrapped in the language of procedure. Officer Daniel Hayes straightened slightly, his posture tightening, as if settling into something more official, more deliberate. The hallway noise had dulled into a low murmur, now the kind that carried curiosity and caution. "Set the briefcase on the table," he said. Not a request. A directive. Aaliyah didn't move. Her eyes stayed on him, steady, unblinking. "On what grounds are you initiating a search?" she asked. Her tone hadn't changed. Still calm. Still precise. And that more than anything seemed to irritate him. Hayes let out a short breath through his nose, glancing briefly to the side as if gathering patience he didn't intend to use. "You're entering a controlled courtroom environment," he replied, voice tightening. "I'm ensuring safety." It sounded reasonable. It always did. But the difference was already visible. No one else had been asked. No one else had been stopped. Aaliyah tilted her head slightly. "Then I assume you've applied that same level of inspection to everyone who entered before me." Hayes didn't answer. Didn't even pretend to. Instead, he gestured again, sharper this time. "Briefcase. Now." The word landed harder. Around them, the hallway had gone quieter still. A clerk who had been pretending not to watch now stood completely still, papers forgotten in his hands. The woman on the bench had her phone raised openly now, no longer pretending to hide it. Recording. Aaliyah noticed. Of course she did, but her attention never left Hayes. "If you are conducting a search," she said, "you are required to articulate a specific and reasonable cause." Her voice carried not loudly, but clearly enough for those nearby to hear every word. Legal language, structured, unshakable. Hayes' jaw tightened. "You're not in a position to dictate how this works," he replied. "I'm in a position to ask you to follow the law," she said. That word again. Law. It didn't sit well with him, because in this moment he believed he was the law. Behind him, the younger officer shifted again, his gaze flickering between Hayes and Aaliyah. Uncertainty now more visible in his posture. He knew something was off, everyone did, but no one stepped in. Not yet. Hayes took a step closer. Not aggressive, but deliberate, closing the space, reasserting control. "You can either cooperate," he said quietly, his voice lowering just enough to feel more personal, more direct, "or we can take this further." There it was. Not policy. Not safety. Escalation. Aaliyah didn't step back. Didn't raise her voice. But something in her posture shifted just slightly. Not defensive. Resolute. "If you choose to escalate without cause," she said, "that decision will carry consequences." The words were calm, but they landed. Hayes' expression hardened. For a split second, something flickered in his eyes. Not doubt. Something closer to irritation, mixed with disbelief. As if he couldn't quite accept that she was still standing there, still pushing back, still composed. Consequences, he repeated, a faint, humorless smile forming. "You're threatening me now. I'm informing you," she replied. Silence followed. Heavy. Charged. The kind of silence that makes people hold their breath without realizing it. Hayes' hand moved. Not fast. Not sudden. But intentional. He reached toward her briefcase again. This time not testing. Not hesitant. Taking. His fingers wrapped around the handle. Aaliyah reacted instantly, her grip tightening. "Do not touch my property," she said. "Clear, firm, public." The two of them stood there, both holding the same object, neither willing to release it. A quiet standoff. A line drawn. The hallway felt like it had stopped breathing. "Let go," Hayes said. "No," Aaliyah replied. Simple. Direct. Final. The word hung between them. And something changed. Because in that moment it was no longer about the briefcase, or the courtroom, or even procedure. It had become something else. A test. Of control. Of authority. Of who would yield first. Hayes exhaled sharply, releasing the briefcase with a quick motion, not backing down but shifting tactics. "Step back," he said. Aaliyah didn't move. "I am authorized to be here," she replied. You're obstructing, he shot back. I'm asserting my rights. Another pause, longer this time. The tension had become undeniable now, visible, palpable. Even the air felt heavier. Somewhere behind them, a quiet voice whispered, "This is going too far." No one responded, because they all knew it already had. Hayes glanced briefly toward the courtroom door, then back at Aaliyah. His jaw clenched. His patience, whatever version of it he believed he had, was gone. "You're not walking in there," he said. The words were low, flat, absolute. Aaliyah held his gaze. "And you're not authorized to stop me without cause." The clash was no longer subtle. It was open, direct, unavoidable. Hayes's hand drifted again, lower, closer to his belt. This time it didn't stop halfway. His fingers brushed against the equipment there, resting, not gripping, but ready. Aaliyah saw it. So did the others. The younger officer shifted again, more noticeably now. "Hey," he started quietly. Hayes didn't look at him, didn't acknowledge him, because he had already made his decision. And once that decision was made, there was no stepping back. Not in front of witnesses, not in front of cameras, not in front of someone who refused to fold. Aaliyah stood exactly where she was, calm, unmoving, unafraid, and that more than anything seemed to push him further, because in his mind this moment had already gone too far to retreat. He had drawn the line. Now he had to defend it, even if it meant crossing another one. The hallway was silent now. No whispers, no movement, just tension. Waiting. Because everyone could feel it, the next second would decide everything. And whatever happened next would not be undone. The silence didn't break. It tightened, like something invisible pulling inward from all sides. Officer Daniel Hayes took a slow step forward, closing what little space remained between them. Not rushed, not out of control, but with the kind of certainty that suggested he believed the outcome had already been decided. "You're done, standing here," he said quietly. Not loud enough for the entire hallway, but loud enough for her, for the phones, for the moment. Aaliyah didn't move, didn't shift her weight, didn't lower her eyes. "I am entering that courtroom," she replied. Her voice remained level, measured, unshaken. Hayes let out a short breath, half laugh, half irritation, as if the conversation itself had become an inconvenience. "No," he said. "You're not." The word landed like a door slamming shut. Behind them, the hallway was no longer pretending. People weren't just watching. They were waiting. A clerk stood frozen near the wall, his file hanging loosely in his hand. The woman on the bench had both hands on her phone, now recording openly. Even the younger officer behind Hayes had shifted his stance, no longer neutral, no longer relaxed. This wasn't procedure anymore. This was escalation. Aaliyah took a single, controlled breath. "Then I am requesting to speak with the presiding judge," she said. The sentence was deliberate, strategic, a formal line drawn in a public space. Hayes's eyes narrowed slightly. "That's not how this works," he replied. "It is," she said, "if access is being denied without cause." Her tone didn't rise, but something in it sharpened. Not emotion, precision. Again. Always precision. Hayes shook his head slowly, a faint smile returning, not amused, but dismissive. "You don't get to just call a judge out here because you don't like being checked," he said. Aaliyah didn't react to the phrasing, didn't rise to it. "I am not objecting to being checked," she replied. "I am objecting to selective enforcement." The words landed harder than anything she had said so far, because they named it. Not directly, but clearly enough. Selective. Hayes's expression changed. Just for a moment. A flicker. Quick. Sharp. Then gone. "You're reading too much into this," he said. "No," Aaliyah answered. "I'm reading exactly what's happening." Another pause. Longer. More dangerous. Hayes shifted his stance again, turning slightly so his body blocked the doorway more fully now, not even pretending to allow passage anymore. "You're not going in," he repeated. Flat. Final. Behind him, the muffled sounds of the courtroom, continued voices, movement, the distant rhythm of a system that had no idea what was unfolding just outside its doors. Time was moving forward, but here it felt suspended. Aaliyah adjusted her grip on the briefcase, not nervously, intentionally. "I am authorized to be present for that hearing," she said. "Your refusal to allow entry is interfering with a federal proceeding." Hayes let out a sharper laugh this time. Federal, he repeated again, as if the word itself had become irritating. Then he leaned slightly closer. "You keep saying that like it's supposed to mean something to me." The words were quiet, but cutting. A few people shifted uncomfortably, because now it wasn't subtle anymore. Aaliyah held his gaze. "It should," she said. "Simple. Direct. No hesitation." That was the moment something tipped. Not visibly, not dramatically, but internally. In him. Because the control he believed he had over the space, over the situation, over her, was being challenged in a way he hadn't expected. And it was happening in front of witnesses, in front of cameras, in front of people who were beginning to understand exactly what they were seeing. Hayes's jaw tightened. His voice dropped lower. "You're causing a scene," he said. Aaliyah's response came without pause. "No," she said. "You are." Silence. Immediate. Heavy. The kind that makes people stop breathing. Because it was true. And everyone knew it. The younger officer behind Hayes shifted again, this time more visibly. "Sir," he started, his voice cautious. Hayes didn't look at him, didn't acknowledge him, because acknowledging him would mean acknowledging doubt, and there was no room for that now. Not here, not like this. Hayes lifted his hand slightly, cutting him off without turning. "I've got it," he said. 3 words. Enough to shut everything down. Aaliyah watched the exchange, noted it, filed it away, because every detail mattered, every movement, every decision. "You are denying access without legal justification," she said again, her voice calm, but carrying now. "I need that on record." The phrase shifted the air. On record. Not just a moment anymore. Documentation. Accountability. Hayes's eyes flicked briefly toward the phones, toward the people watching, toward the realization that this wasn't just happening. It was being captured. That should have slowed him down, should have forced reconsideration. Instead, it did the opposite. Because now stepping back didn't just mean correcting himself. It meant admitting he had been wrong. In public. And that was something he wasn't prepared to do. "You want a record?" he said, his voice tightening. "Fine." He stepped forward again. Closer. More aggressive now. "Here's your record," he added. "You're being detained for obstruction." The words hit the air like a shockwave. A murmur rippled through the hallway. Aaliyah didn't move, didn't flinch. "On what basis?" she asked. Even now. Still precise. Still controlled. Hayes didn't answer. Not directly, because there wasn't one. Instead, he reached for her arm. Not violently, but without hesitation, without permission. His grip closed just above her elbow. Firm. Restraining. The shift was immediate. Gasps. A sharp intake of breath from somewhere behind them. The younger officer took a half step forward, then stopped, frozen between instinct and hierarchy. Aaliyah looked down briefly at Hayes's hand, then back up at him. Her expression didn't change. But her voice, when she spoke, was colder. "You need to let go," she said. Hayes didn't loosen his grip, didn't step back. "Not until you comply," he replied. The standoff had changed. This wasn't verbal anymore, this was physical, public, unavoidable. And in that moment, everyone watching knew there was no coming back from this. Because once that line was crossed, everything that followed would only escalate. And Hayes had just taken the first step too far. The moment his hand closed around her arm, everything changed. Not gradually, not subtly, completely. Aaliyah Bennett did not pull away. That was the first thing people noticed. She didn't jerk back, didn't raise her voice, didn't react the way most expected someone would when grabbed like that in public. She simply looked at his hand, then back at his face. "You need to let go," she repeated. Her tone hadn't risen, but it had sharpened. The calm was still there, but now it carried something colder, something heavier. A warning. Officer Daniel Hayes didn't release her. If anything, his grip tightened just slightly, as if the act of being told to stop only reinforced his need to continue. "Not until you comply," he said. The words were flat, final. Around them, the hallway had gone completely still. No murmurs. No shifting. Just silence. Phones held steady. Recording. Watching. Waiting. The younger officer behind Hayes took another small step forward, his uncertainty now unmistakable. "Sir." He tried again, quieter this time. Hayes didn't turn, didn't respond, because responding would mean acknowledging that something had gone wrong, and he wasn't ready for that. Not in front of everyone. Aaliyah adjusted her stance just enough to relieve pressure from his grip, but not enough to step back. She remained exactly where she was, grounded, controlled. "You are detaining me without cause," she said. Each word was deliberate, measured, public. Hayes exhaled sharply. "You're obstructing a security process," he replied. "That process has not been applied equally," she said. Again. Precise. Unavoidable. Hayes's jaw tightened. His eyes flicked briefly toward the phones, toward the people watching, toward the reality that this was no longer just between the two of them. It was being documented. Every second, every word, every decision. That should have slowed him down, should have forced a pause. Instead, it pressed him forward, because now stepping back wasn't just correction. It was concession, and he wasn't going to concede. Not here. Not like this. "You keep talking like you're in charge," he said, leaning slightly closer, his voice lowering. "You're not." Aaliyah met his gaze, unmoved. "I don't need to be in charge," she said. "I need you to follow the law." The words landed harder than anything else, because they stripped away the moment, reduced it to its core. Right, wrong. Hayes' grip tightened again, not violently, but enough. Enough for people to notice. Enough for the younger officer to shift again, his discomfort now impossible to hide. "Sir, maybe we should just—" I said. "I've got it," Hayes snapped, this time louder, sharper. The interruption died instantly. The younger officer stepped back, silenced. The hierarchy held, even as the situation cracked beneath it. Aaliyah watched that exchange closely, because it confirmed something. This wasn't confusion. This wasn't miscommunication. This was choice, and he was choosing to escalate. "You are interfering with a federal proceeding," she said again, her voice carrying now. "You need to release me." Hayes shook his head. Not happening. Simple. Dismissive. Final. Aaliyah inhaled slowly. Not out of fear. Out of control. "Then I am going to walk into that courtroom," she said. Each word spaced. Clear. Intentional. Hayes's eyes narrowed. "You're not going anywhere." And then she moved. Not suddenly, not aggressively, just one step forward. A controlled, deliberate motion toward the courtroom door. Hayes reacted instantly. His grip shifted, pulling her back. Harder this time. The movement wasn't violent, but it wasn't neutral either. It was force, a visible shift. Gasps broke through the silence. A sharp intake of breath from someone near the wall. Aaliyah steadied herself, regained balance, and looked at him again. Still calm, still composed. But now, there was no space left between warning and action. "Do not touch me again," she said. The words were low, cold, final. Hayes didn't release her, didn't step back. Because now he couldn't, not without losing everything he thought he was holding on to. "You're making this worse," he said. "No," Aaliyah replied. "You already did that." Silence followed. Heavy. Unavoidable. And then something shifted. Not in words. In posture. Hayes's hand moved. Down. Toward his belt. This time not hovering. Not resting. Gripping. The taser. The motion was small. Subtle. But unmistakable. Aaliyah saw it. So did the people watching. So did the camera capturing every frame. The younger officer stepped forward again, faster this time. "Sir, that's not necessary." "Step back," Hayes snapped. And he did. Because even now, even here, the chain of command held. Aaliyah didn't move, didn't step away, didn't raise her hands. She stood exactly where she was, facing him, unflinching. "You're not in control of this." Hayes said, his voice tight now, strained beneath the surface. Aaliyah's response came without hesitation. "No," she said quietly. "You just lost control." The words landed. Deep. Final. And something inside him snapped. Not loudly, not visibly, but enough. Because in that moment it stopped being about procedure, about authority, about justification. It became reaction, impulse, the need to end the challenge, to shut it down, to reassert control no matter the cost. Hayes raised the taser. The movement was fast, decisive, final. Aaliyah didn't have time to step back, didn't have time to speak. The click echoed sharp, loud, unmistakable, and in the next second everything would change. The click came first, sharp, mechanical, unmistakable. For a fraction of a second it hung in the air, separate from everything else. Separate from the hallway, from the people, from the moment itself. And in that fraction of a second, everything stopped. No one spoke. No one moved. No one breathed. Officer Daniel Hayes stood, rigid arm extended, the taser now fully raised. His finger tightened along the trigger, his jaw clenched, his eyes locked onto Aaliyah Bennett with a kind of focus that had gone beyond reason, beyond procedure, beyond control. Aaliyah saw it. She saw the decision already made in his posture, in the tension in his shoulders, in the way the space between them had disappeared, not physically, but in every other sense that mattered. Still, she didn't step back, didn't raise her hands, didn't plead. She stood where she was, grounded, composed, unmoving. "You don't have to do this," she said. Her voice was low, calm, clear. The words weren't fear. They were fact. But Hayes didn't hear them. Or maybe he did and chose to ignore them, because in that moment stepping back was no longer an option he believed he had. Not with the cameras, not with the witnesses, not with the challenge still standing in front of him. His finger pulled. The crack split the hallway. Electric. Violent. Final. Aaliyah's body reacted instantly. The force hit her like an invisible wall, sharp, overwhelming, ripping control away in a single brutal surge. Her muscles locked, her balance shattered, and for a split second she remained upright. Then she fell. Hard. The sound of her body hitting the polished floor echoed louder than it should have. Because of the silence. Because of the shock. Because no one had expected it to actually happen. A collective gasp tore through the hallway. Someone shouted, "Hey, what are you doing?" Another voice, "Oh my God!" Phones jerked upward, hands trembled, but no one moved forward. No one stepped in, because it had happened too fast, too suddenly, too far. Aaliyah lay still for a moment, her body rigid from the shock breath, uneven, her hand still partially clenched around the strap of her briefcase. Then, the briefcase slipped, fell sideways. The latch snapped open as it hit the ground, and everything inside spilled out. Papers scattered across the floor, white against polished stone, sliding outward in uneven arcs. A pen rolled. A folder slid. And then something heavier. Something darker. Something that didn't belong to the chaos. A leather case. It hit the ground with a dull, solid sound before sliding across the floor, spinning once, before coming to a stop just a few feet away. Facing upward. Still. Silent. The gold lettering caught the overhead light, clear, unmistakable. United States Department of Justice. The words didn't need to be read out loud. They were seen, recognized, understood. The shift in the room was immediate, total. A murmur started low, disbelieving. What is that? Wait. No way. The younger officer's eyes locked onto the case, his face drained of color, his mouth opened slightly, but no words came out. Because he knew. He understood before anyone said it, before it was confirmed, before it became undeniable. Hayes didn't move at first, didn't lower the taser, didn't look away. Because for 1 second he hadn't seen it yet, hadn't processed what had just happened beyond the action itself. But then his gaze dropped, followed the direction of the murmurs, tracked the line of sight from the people around him down to the floor, to the case, to the gold lettering. And everything inside him shifted, instantly, visibly. His grip loosened, the taser lowered just slightly, his breath hitched. Not loudly, but enough. Enough for the people closest to him to hear it. Enough for the camera to catch the change. The certainty in his posture cracked, replaced by something else. Something colder. Something far more dangerous. Realization. No. Someone whispered. Another voice louder now. That's DOJ. And then the words that sealed it. She's federal counsel. The sentence moved through the hallway like a shock wave. From one person to another. From whisper to certainty. From doubt to fact. Aaliyah shifted on the floor. A small movement, but enough. Her hand pressed weakly against the ground as she tried to steady herself. Her breathing still uneven, her body recovering from the force of the shock. She hadn't spoken yet. Hadn't needed to. The evidence was already there. On the floor, in plain sight. Undeniable. Hayes took a step back. Just one. But it was the first backward movement he had made since the confrontation began. His eyes flicked from the case, to Aaliyah, to the people watching, to the phones recording, to the reality unfolding faster than he could contain it. "No," he muttered. This time louder. Not denial, not exactly, but not acceptance either, because accepting it meant understanding what he had just done, and that understanding was beginning to take shape. In real time, in front of everyone. The hallway was no longer silent. It was filled with low voices now. Urgent, disbelieving. Some stepping closer, some stepping back. All watching. Because this moment, this exact second, was the point where everything changed. Not gradually, not slowly. Instantly. The power had shifted. The narrative had flipped. And the man who had controlled every second up until now was no longer in control of anything. Aaliyah drew in a slow, unsteady breath. Her hand moved slightly, toward the leather case, toward the proof, toward the truth that had just entered the room. And as she did, Hayes froze. Completely. Because in that moment, he understood. Not fully. Not yet. But enough. Enough to know this wasn't a mistake he could explain away. This wasn't something that would disappear. This wasn't something he could fix. Because what had just happened had already been seen, recorded, understood, and it was only just beginning. The courthouse returned to motion. Not normal. Not exactly. But something close enough that from a distance it looked the same. Dockets continued to move. Names were called. Cases unfolded in structured arguments and measured objections. The system designed to move forward did what it always did. It continued. But beneath that surface, something had shifted. Not loudly, not dramatically, quietly, permanently. Because what had happened in that hallway had not stayed there. It had entered the record. It had entered memory. And most importantly, it had entered awareness. 2 weeks after the incident, the courthouse felt different in ways that couldn't be documented in policy, but could be seen in behavior. Officers no longer leaned casually against the walls near courtroom entrances. They stood upright, attentive, measured in their movements, conscious of their tone, of their presence, of their decisions. Clerks who once watched interactions passively now observed more carefully. Not just processing paperwork, but noticing people. Attorneys spoke with slightly more intention. Their voices carried a subtle awareness of who was in the room and how they were being heard. Nothing had been officially announced to the public beyond the investigation. No sweeping statements, no declarations of reform. But change. Real change rarely begins that way. It begins in moments like this. Moments that refuse to be ignored. Officer Daniel Hayes' name no longer circulated in casual conversation. It existed now in files, in reports, in ongoing proceedings that stretched beyond the walls of that courthouse. His actions had not disappeared into administrative silence. They had been documented, reviewed, questioned, frame by frame, word by word. Every decision he had made in that hallway was now part of something larger than himself. And that was the difference, because for once, the system had not looked away. Aaliyah Bennett returned to the courthouse the following Monday at 9:02 a.m., the same time she had arrived weeks before. Her pace hadn't changed. Her posture hadn't changed. Her expression remained composed, focused, unshaken. But everything around her had. The security checkpoint that had once slowed her down now opened before she reached it. An officer stepped aside immediately. "Good morning, ma'am," he said. "Respectful. Intentional." Aaliyah nodded once, acknowledging, but not lingering, because the moment wasn't about correction. It was about consistency. She walked through the hallway where everything had happened. The same polished floor, the same walls, the same doors. But no one blocked her path. No one questioned her presence. No one hesitated. People moved aside instinctively, quietly, not out of fear, but out of understanding, because they had seen what happens when someone is underestimated and refuses to yield. Inside, Courtroom 4, B proceedings continued. Another case, another set of arguments, another day in a system designed to process conflict and resolution. Aaliyah took her seat at the counsel table, opened her files, reviewed her notes. No announcement, no acknowledgement, no shift in her role. Because her work had never changed. Only the way it was seen. Across the room, a junior attorney glanced in her direction, then looked down quickly, then back again. This time not with uncertainty, but with respect. A few rows behind a clerk adjusted her posture as Aaliyah passed. Subtle, but noticeable. These weren't dramatic gestures. They didn't need to be, because respect rarely announces itself. It reveals itself in behavior, in attention, in presence. Later that afternoon, as the courtroom emptied and voices softened into quiet conversation, a young associate approached her, mid-20s, nervous, careful in his steps. "Ms. Bennett," he said. She looked up. "Yes?" He hesitated. "Just briefly." "I saw what happened," he said, not referencing it directly, not needing to. Aaliyah didn't respond immediately. She waited. He continued. "I just wanted to say it changed how I think about things." The words were simple, but honest. Aaliyah studied him for a moment, then closed the file in front of her. "What changed?" she asked. The question caught him slightly off guard. He took a breath. "Who gets questioned?" he said. "Who gets believed? Who gets stopped?" Aaliyah nodded once. "That's a start," she said. He nodded in return. More certain now. "Thank you," he added. Aaliyah gave a small acknowledgement, then returned to her work. Because the moment, while meaningful, wasn't the goal. Understanding was. And understanding doesn't end in conversation. It begins there. As the day came to a close, the courthouse slowly emptied. Voices faded. Doors closed. The rhythm of the building softened into quiet. Aaliyah gathered her materials. Same method. Same precision. Every movement intentional. She stepped out into the hallway one more time. The space felt still. Not empty, but settled, as if something had passed through it and left something behind. Not tension, not conflict, clarity. She walked toward the exit, her footsteps steady, measured, unhurried. At the far end of the corridor, the younger officer from that day stood near the wall. He saw her, straightened slightly, not out of obligation, out of awareness. Their eyes met briefly. He didn't speak. Didn't need to. Because some acknowledgments don't require words. They passed each other. And that was enough. Outside the city moved as it always did. Cars passing. People talking. Life continuing. Unchanged on the surface. But beneath it, something had shifted. Because moments like that don't disappear. They stay. They echo. They reshape the way the next moment unfolds. Aaliyah stepped onto the sidewalk, paused for just a second. Not to reflect, not to look back. Just to breathe. Then she continued forward. Into the noise. Into the movement. Into the work that had never stopped. Behind her, the courthouse stood as it always had. But now it carried something new. A memory. A record. A line that had been crossed. And finally seen.